Largest toy store chain in the U.S., Toys R Us, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection.
Toys R Us says its 1,600 locations will remain open for business despite filing for bankruptcy.
Could affect your holiday shopping. Toys R Us files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection.
It was once the place where kids' dreams came true. An endless wonderland of toys stacked floor to ceiling. Toys R Us was a cultural icon, a $12 billion empire, and a rite of passage for generations of children. But after more than 60 years of dominance, it crumbled under a mountain of debt, digital distribution, and strategic missteps. This is the rise and fall of Toys R Us. Before Toys R Us became a $12 billion retail empire, it began with a man and a modest vision. Charles Lazarus was born in 1923 in Washington, D.C. The son of a bicycle shop owner, he grew up during the Great Depression, a time when frugality and practicality were a way of life. After serving in World War II, Lazarus returned home with an understanding of the post-war American consumer, young, eager to spend, and ready to start families. He opened a baby furniture store called Children's Bargain Town in 1948, anticipating the coming baby boom. But Lazarus had a sharp eye for opportunity. He noticed that while parents only bought cribs and dressers once, they kept returning to buy toys, which broke, got lost, or simply grew boring to their kids. He leaned into this pattern and pivoted his business to focus entirely on toys. In 1957, he launched the first official Toys R Us store, inventing the concept of the toy supermarket. It was a bold move in an era when most toy stores were small boutique shops. Lazarus introduced warehouse-style layouts, endless aisles, and low prices, long before Walmart ever did. He also understood branding. The reversed R was meant to look like a child had written it. He created Joffrey the giraffe, a friendly, cartoonish mascot, and he rolled out one of the most iconic jingles in advertising history. I don't want to grow up, I'm a Toys R Us kid. Under Lazarus's leadership, Toys R Us became the largest toy retailer in the world. By the time he stepped down as CEO in 1994, after 46 years, the company had grown to over 1,000 stores globally and earned more than $10 billion in annual revenue. By the late 1970s, Toys R Us wasn't just a toy store, it was the toy store. Charles Lazarus had cracked the code, a high-volume, low-margin, big-box model that operated like a supermarket for toys. While mom-and-pop toy stores focused on atmosphere or specialty items, Toys R Us bet on scale. The average store carried over 18,000 toy products, and the warehouse-style layout, with tall steel shelves and pallets of products, allowed kids to feel like they were walking through a toy universe. For parents, it was practical. For kids, it was magical. Between 1978 and 1990, Toys R Us grew from around 100 stores to nearly 700. The company went public in 1978, and by the mid-1980s, it had become the largest toy retailer in the world, controlling roughly 25% of the US toy market. It was during this period that Joffrey the giraffe became a household name. He wasn't just a mascot. He was the face of a brand that was, in many ways, a part of American childhood. TV commercials, Saturday morning ads, and holiday specials all pushed the same message: I don't want to grow up, I'm a Toys R Us kid. Toys R Us dominated holiday shopping, especially Black Friday and Christmas. Some stores even had entire aisles dedicated to single toy lines like G.I. Joe, Barbie, Lego, and later, Nintendo. If a toy was a hit, like the Tickle Me Elmo craze in 1996, Toys R Us was the first and most important stop for customers. One of the reasons Toys R Us scaled so quickly and profitably was because of how advanced its logistics operation was for its time. Long before logistics was a buzzword, Toys R Us mastered just-in-time inventory, a system that allowed them to hold less stock in stores and instead replenish them rapidly based on real-time demand. This reduced overhead and shrinkage while increasing product turnover, key to managing a wide inventory with seasonal spikes. The company operated a massive network of distribution centers across the US and overseas, acting as central hubs for product sorting and shipping. This allowed them to centralize inventory management and negotiate bulk discounts with manufacturers like Mattel, Hasbro, and Nintendo. Toys R Us also pioneered the pay-to-play shelf model, charging toy companies for prime shelf real estate and exclusive placements. If your toy wasn't on a Toys R Us shelf during the holiday season, it might not get seen at all. In many ways, the retailer became more powerful than the toy companies themselves. At their peak, Toys R Us was moving tens of millions of units each holiday season. Their operations could pivot instantly to meet changing demand, like the Beanie Baby craze in the 90s or the surprise breakout of the Nintendo 64. Their ability to scale supply chains was almost military in precision. And unlike department stores, Toys R Us made toys a year-round business, not just seasonal. By the early 1990s, they were bringing in over $11 billion in annual revenue. In 1984, Toys R Us launched its international strategy, opening stores in Canada and then slowly entering Europe. But one of its boldest and most historic moves came in the early 1990s, entering the highly protected Japanese market. At the time, Japan had strict retail zoning laws and regulations that made it nearly impossible for foreign big box retailers to operate. Local toy stores were deeply entrenched in Japanese culture, and powerful retail unions opposed foreign entrants. For decades, Japan was a no-go zone for American chains. But Toys R Us saw an opportunity. Backed by political pressure from US trade negotiators during the 1980s and 1990s, they pushed hard to open the market. Charles Lazarus personally lobbied regulators, and in 1991, Toys R Us opened its first store in Japan, a major win in global retail history. They did it by creating a joint venture with Japanese company McDonald's Japan, allowing them to navigate the bureaucratic hurdles and gain local expertise. The success of that first store paved the way for dozens more across the country, and soon, Toys R Us had a strong foothold in Asia. By the mid-1990s, the company had expanded to over 20 countries, including the UK, Germany, Australia, and Taiwan. International sales quickly became a major growth engine. By the early 2000s, overseas operations made up nearly one-third of the company's total revenue. During its golden era, Toys R Us wasn't just a retailer, it was a cultural institution, a logistical powerhouse, and a Wall Street darling. It made toy shopping an event, and for a whole generation, childhood was defined by that jingle, those aisles, and the excitement of walking into a store built just for them.
Amazon reportedly isn't wasting any time in capitalizing on the demise of Toys R Us.
By the early 2000s, it was clear the future of retail was online, but Toys R Us, a brick-and-mortar giant, wasn't equipped to build an e-commerce empire on its own. So, in 2000, they made what seemed like a strategic move, a 10-year, $50 million a year partnership with a rising tech company called Amazon. Under this agreement, Toys R Us became the exclusive vendor of toys, games, and baby products on Amazon.com. Amazon, in turn, would handle the website, order processing, and customer service, while Toys R Us provided inventory. Essentially, Toys R Us outsourced its online presence to Amazon in exchange for traffic and infrastructure. But cracks began to show fast. Despite the exclusive clause, Amazon allowed third-party sellers to list and sell toys, even the same ones carried by Toys R Us. The toy chain noticed unauthorized vendors competing with its products on Amazon's marketplace, undercutting prices and breaking the deal. In 2004, Toys R Us sued Amazon for breach of contract in New Jersey Chancery Court. They argued that the agreement gave them exclusive rights in the toy category, and Amazon violated that exclusivity. Amazon countered by saying Toys R Us had failed to keep items in stock and wasn't meeting demand, forcing them to supplement inventory from other sellers. In 2006, the court sided with Toys R Us. The judge ruled that Amazon had indeed breached the agreement by allowing other retailers in the same category. The court terminated the contract, freeing Toys R Us to build its own website again. But this was a Pyrrhic victory. By then, Amazon had exploded in popularity, and Toys R Us had missed 5 critical years of developing its digital infrastructure. While they were tangled in court, Amazon was innovating with features like Prime, personalized recommendations, and a robust seller ecosystem. Toys R Us was just beginning to understand e-commerce, and it was already too late. They won the lawsuit, but lost the war.
Anyone remember Shopko? Yeah. You know why Shopko's closed? Private equity. Anyone remember Sears? Yeah, Sears, private equity. Toys R Us, Gymboree, and it's not just the retailers.
By the early 2000s, Toys R Us was still pulling in billions in revenue, but it was losing its dominance. Walmart and Target had captured huge chunks of the toy market, and Amazon was rapidly shifting how people shopped. Internally, Toys R Us was seen as slow to modernize, and Wall Street noticed. So in 2005, private equity came knocking. A consortium made up of Bain Capital, Kohlberg Kravis Roberts KKR, and Vornado Realty Trust bought Toys R Us for $6.6 billion in one of the biggest leveraged buyouts of the decade. A leveraged buyout, or LBO, is when a firm buys a company primarily with borrowed money, not cash. In this case, Bain, KKR, and Vornado put in only around $1.3 billion of their own money and borrowed the rest, about $5.3 billion, using Toys R Us itself as collateral. The debt was placed on the company's balance sheet, meaning Toys R Us was now responsible for paying back billions of dollars in loans plus interest every single year. Even though Toys R Us continued making strong revenue, averaging $11 to $13 billion annually, much of that money was now being funneled into interest payments, not reinvested into the business. They were paying over $400 million in interest every year. That's money that could have been used to build a strong e-commerce platform, remodel aging stores, or keep prices competitive with Amazon and Walmart. While their competitors were spending heavily on digital innovation, next-day shipping, and sleek omni-channel experiences, Toys R Us was operating like it was still 1998. Stores were cluttered, underlit, and outdated. The website was sluggish and uninspiring. The mobile app was an afterthought. And that wasn't just because of bad decisions. It was because they didn't have the cash to adapt. For every $1 Toys R Us earned, a huge portion had to be set aside for lenders. Meanwhile, the interest was compounding. Any attempt to grow the business, even through store remodeling or tech upgrades, had to be approved by the private equity board, whose priority was paying back the debt, not modernizing the business. Despite the company's mounting challenges, the private equity firm still made money. Over the years, Bain, KKR, and Vornado collected millions in advisory fees, real estate gains, and other payouts, all while Toys R Us was bleeding. In fact, in 2016, just 1 year before bankruptcy, Toys R Us paid $200 million in interest and consulting fees to the private equity owners, while laying off workers and cutting store budgets. They didn't buy Toys R Us to build it. They bought it to extract value from it. By 2017, Toys R Us was drowning in more than $5 billion in debt and losing market shares fast. Its competitors had transformed into agile omni-channel powerhouses. Amazon was offering 2-day delivery with reviews and easy returns. Meanwhile, Toys R Us stores still looked like they hadn't been updated since the 90s. That same year, the company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, not because sales were zero, but because the debt was unmanageable. Ironically, Toys R Us still held around 15% of the toy market in the US, but the debt burden crushed any ability to compete long-term. In 2018, Toys R Us began liquidation. It closed or sold all 735 stores in the US, laid off 33,000 employees, and left behind unpaid bills to vendors totaling over $1 billion, impacting dozens of toy companies, including Hasbro and Mattel. After liquidation, the brand's assets, including the name, trademarks, and mascot, were taken over by a new entity, True Kids Inc., composed of the former lenders. In 2019, they opened 2 boutique-style Toys R Us stores in New Jersey and Texas with interactive experiences, play zones, and fewer products. The idea was to focus on retailtainment, but the COVID-19 pandemic shut both locations by 2021. In 2021, Macy's announced a new partnership with Toys R Us to open miniature stores inside 400 or more of its department stores nationwide. These pop-up concepts aim to rekindle nostalgia and introduce the brand to Gen Z parents. By 2023, some larger flagship stores were also being tested, including a new Toys R Us location inside the American Dream Mall in New Jersey, operated by WHP Global, a brand management firm that now owns the brand. The question remains, can Toys R Us thrive in an era where kids grow up on iPads and parents prefer Amazon Prime over long checkout lines? Toys R Us was more than just a retailer. It was a cultural touchstone. Its fall shows how even the biggest brands can collapse when they stop evolving. In the end, it wasn't just e-commerce or Walmart that killed Toys R Us. It was a combination of debt, leadership missteps, and a failure to adapt. But as long as there are kids who love toys and parents who feel nostalgia, maybe, just maybe, Toys R Us will rise again. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments, what was your favorite memory at Toys R Us?